Hi family. My name is Lena. I'm an alcoholic. Glenn, thank you so much for inviting me to share my experience. I'm very grateful to be here. You know, I was just thinking again about this format that we now have, which is so standard. Like I can be in Hawaii and you can be anywhere else, and we can all meet together for lunch. So bon appetit to those who are having lunch. I'm also kind of grateful to the disease of alcoholism, because that was, in my case, turned out to be sort of the doorway into grace, into transformation, into something different, and something that really gave me a sense of living as an experience that I want to have. So I grew up in a former USSR. It's so strange that we're living at the time right now where I'm ashamed to say where my accent is coming from. Not talking about politics. So drinking was a way of life, at least in my family, in pretty much in lives of families of people that I knew. And as a child, I kind of do remember those glimpses of like overwhelming love and sense of goodness on occasion, for my mother, or sometimes even for my life circumstances. Being happy to be born in this great country, as I was told. And I don't know at what point it all went to hell, but at some point I found myself into this very unpleasant and sort of dissatisfied narrative. And that basically like what became my life, like this constant narrative of life not being enough, me not being enough, me not being where I want to be. There was a sense of dissatisfaction. There was this sense of not being okay with life and all of its offerings. And I guess it's a family culture, and I guess that's what essentially is alcoholism, this unbearable sense of being. And I could see that people around me, they used alcohol to cope with that. My biological father was a chronic alcoholic. I don't remember him much. He committed suicide when he was the same age that I was when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. My mom was married to another alcoholic, and he was an alcoholic of a different type. But alcohol was present in our lives. Some people were drinking, some people were controlling it. And I remember as a child sitting under a table. We lived in a very small room, and just watching my stepfather, being like very dry, very unhappy person, not a smile on his face under normal circumstances. And then he would have a drink, and something would shift, and a smile would come on his face, and I could sense that. I could sense that transformation. I could sense that relief that I really wanted very much. And as a child, I remember at that time just constantly not wanting to be in my body, just constantly trying to distract myself from myself, biting my nails, picking my nose, humming constantly, making music in my head, thinking obsessively, fantasizing about being elsewhere, but just so that I'm not here, because being in the moment was unbearable. And when I was about 13 years old, I felt it was time for me to try the miracle beverage. And I drank with my friend. We played violins by day, and at night we decided it was time, that we were grown enough, that it was good time to have that experience. And we got a bottle of pepper vodka, which even for a grown-up man was like one of the most disgusting things to have. We didn't have much of a selection back then at that country, and I remember taking that first drink, and I do remember two things happened. One is that that unbearable sense of being, it sort of went away, and I experienced the quietness and the peace and the relief. I mean, not the peace and the relief that I experience today, um, uh, but there was a relief that I experienced. And the second thing that happened is that like literally the first drink took the second drink, and the second drink took the third drink, and in the morning, my brother found me in a dry bathtub in a pool of my own vomit, and I had a terrible alcohol poisoning, and we all had a good laugh. So I was initiated into this culture, of consuming alcohol. And my mother, who was not an alcoholic, I could never relate to her experience with alcohol. When she learned about it, she just I could just see this, fear in her eyes, because she was hoping that I would get on the side of the controllers of those who drink. But it was, obvious that I had the genetic component, that I didn't have control when I drank ever. So from that point on, I noted that I want to do this as often as I can. And at 13, you basically don't really have too many opportunities. But at 15, looking back right now, it sounds really strange, but like in my family, my mom worked at a place where she had access to medical alcohol. And when I was 15 or 16, alcohol was served at the table, to me as well, just like to everyone. And I just remember that, chemical reaction that happens when you dilute it with water, and it gets really, really muddy, and warm. And that's how I liked it. At first it was just on occasion, and then it was always destructive. Like in my case, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and I was explained what an allergy is, it was the easiest thing for me to identify. I didn't have to think about, how my body reacted to alcohol. The moment alcohol goes in my body, I lose all control. It's always been there. It's never not been that way. So it was very, very easy for me to see that. So the first about 10 years of my drinking were like very, very sloppy. So I was that sloppy drunk who, would embarrass myself, throw up on your shoes, get into trouble, wake up in places with people that I didn't know, be a victim of violence, get into relationships that were just crazy. Like alcohol just became too much, and I've experienced a lot of consequences. But when you're a teenager, it kind of seems that a lot of people experience even worse consequences around me. So it never really occurred to me that alcohol might be a problem. When I was 18, I got married to a guy who really did need for his experience to being different. So I have no idea why we were brought together. Like his idea of a good night was to just quit the party, go home, and get in a yoga pose on his hat and stand in that position for 30 minutes. Like that was his ideal. And for me, it was just like all hell had to break loose. I had to drink to access noisy, stupid, and blacking out always. Like every time I was like a queen of blacking out. Remember these moments when I wake up and and I recognize that my husband is not talking to me, and I have no idea why he's not talking to me, and I don't want him to explain to me why he's not talking to me on that particular occasion. And so it went, and just changing, trying to get out of that state of being restless, irritable, and discontented that's so beautifully described in our literature. That's something that I could also identify with when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, that ongoing sense of life not being satisfactory. And when I was 25, there was an opportunity for us to leave the country, and I initiated the move, and I thought that would make difference. And it's true, sometimes other things would also give the same effect as alcohol was giving me, like the ego drives, like, to get a degree, to get an experience of living in a different country and certain freedoms that I thought I would enjoy. But ultimately alcohol became the only interest. And we moved here to the United States, and 2 years later, I walked out of my husband because I couldn't drink the way I wanted to drink at the time. And the second 10 years of my drinking were pretty much like drinking myself into this complete isolation, in this loneliness, into the dirty apartment with lots of glasses and bottles, hungry cats, drying plants, just everything was like dying around me. And at some point, it's really hard to to remember dates, because um, like I just remember living through 10 years of just every day being the same day, waking up when it's getting dark, and grabbing at the bottle or getting the bottle, and just constant this daily drinking. And I remember that at some point there was this thought that maybe I'm drinking too much, and maybe I should just not drink today. And there would be another thought that would dismiss it, saying that no, everything's okay. I mean, like you still have years before you get to that point where you can't really stop. So I don't know how I knew that. And that's another wonderful feature of alcoholism, is this ability to sell myself anything I need to sell myself. Just to continue doing that gives me relief. Just this lie upon a lie. The lie is getting more and more ridiculous and less convincing. But there is still this something in me that still believes in a lie that's so obvious to everyone, and that's even obvious to me. And the last two years, about 2 years before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, my life is I'm a daily drinker. I wake up every morning with the thought of I'm not going to drink today, and drinking either immediately or in 10 minutes if it's in a closet hidden somewhere, or if at the moment when the store opens up, or at the moment when I have an opportunity. And it just goes on like this, like year, like month after month after month. And one day I wake up with the same, and it's amazing how God starts showing up in our lives. I mean, I've heard so many stories of miracles, and some of them are completely uneventful. When something happened that it just wasn't likely for that to happen in that experience. And for me, it's also the waking up to the truth, to this life was a series of little shifts, little experiences that I didn't even notice at the time when they were happening. And the first thing that happened in my case is that I remember that not a year, not a month, I just remember that there was this moment when I woke up the same morning, same promise, I'm not going to drink today, and nothing in me believed in it. Like nothing in me moved. There was absolutely, like, I didn't believe in that at all, that I had the power to not drink that day. And that's all it was. Just, there became a thought, we're going to not drink today. And in the past, it would be yes. And, all of my energies would go towards proving to myself that I have that control. And one morning I woke up, and there was nothing in me that believed in it. I just really stood in the truth of it, in the truth of the fact that there is absolutely nothing that I can do to make myself not drink. And it was powerful. It was scary, because I didn't believe in anything else that could help me. In my case, these steps 1 and 2 didn't come to me in one package, as it sometimes happens to people. For me, it was just, I can't. But I didn't know if there was any power that could, and I wasn't willing to believe in any power. So, and in the meantime, even that admission of the truth that happened to me spontaneously was enough for something to start changing. And looking back, I can see how things started coming into my experience that I just I didn't wish for, I didn't know existed. For example, the man that I was dating went to an AA meeting, and I came for support. And I came to an AA meeting, and I could hear a speaker, and who was also a girl from from Europe somewhere, and I was just going through the checklist of things that she's done and experienced, and I just couldn't deny that I had the same thing that she did. Just sometimes identical stories, like waking up with certain patterns of bruises that obviously came from something that I couldn't possibly remember what they were. And that got my attention, and I started going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. So it wasn't really enough, for me to see the truth that I had no control over alcohol, that I had no ability to stop. it didn't translate to me into the freedom from alcohol. Like it didn't translate into abstinence. So I started going to AA meetings, but I continued drinking, knowing that I'm powerless. And a few years later, when I read Bill's story, and I remember how he describes him getting out of the hospital the second to last time, knowing that he will drink. So that was me. You know, I know that I have no control, and I'm drinking. And I started going to meetings with Alcoholics Anonymous, so I would come late, I would leave early. I had a bottle in my bag, or I had a bottle in my car. Um, and and it wasn't catching. You know, nothing was really happening. And once I admitted that I had a bottle of my in my bag, and a lot of very helpful, um, uh, well-meaning women came up to me and embraced me and welcomed me, and took me for a walk and grabbed my bottle out of my hands and put it in a garbage can that was in the middle of the street, and shared their experiences. And there were a lot of promises that were expressed for me. And then we, gave each other a deep hug. And I went right back to the garbage can, picked up the bottle, and went on. And that continued for some time when, I was coming to meetings in dark glasses with my bangs covering my face. Because at that point, I really couldn't face myself. I didn't know what it was like. I was suffering like a dog. I didn't know that I was suffering. And on April 24th, 2000, another shift happened. And and it was a regular day like any, other day. At the time, I drank that day, and I came to a meeting, which was there were meetings in the city where I got sober, when people were reading the first 3 steps out of 12 and 12. We called it the beginner's waltz, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And I came to one of those incomprehensible God steps, like second and third, when people were talking about things that I had absolutely no experience with and no desire to experience. And then, I was pushed to share, and I broke down, and somebody came up to me and said that, well, listen, today is the Good Friday. It was a big holiday for somebody, full of promise. And he was convinced that on that day, a miracle could happen. And I couldn't believe, and I wasn't convinced, and I didn't really appreciate all of those things that he was celebrating. I didn't know them. I didn't want to know them. And yet he was talking to me about his faith, and he took me home, and we walked, or he drove me, I don't remember. And he was sharing with me his belief, and 2 things were happening. At the intellectual level, everything that he was talking to me about his higher power, his version of the higher power, everything was like blah 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 blah. It was like missing. It wasn't catching, right? There was nothing it wasn't touching, nothing in me. But at the heart level, right, I could get just one thing, that a miracle could happen, was available to me on that particular day. Right. I didn't know if it would be available the next day or the day before, but like just that little, like the experience of a miracle could happen on that particular day. So I could get with that. And I came home and I got on my knees, and that was the first time when I prayed. I didn't know any prayers. I didn't know whom I prayed to. Now looking back, I see that that's, that was actually a perfect prayer for that reason, because I really didn't reserve any outcome that I was asking for, right? So I was done, and I was asking for help in whichever form it would come. And that was really, apparently it was effective, because that was the last day I drank. So I was delivered into abstinence, but not into sobriety, right? So I was delivered into abstinence, and I got on this like classic pink cloud. I didn't have a context for that. I didn't know what was happening to me, but all of a sudden it became possible not to drink. I felt really good. My relationships with people got better. Everything acted the right way, the way I wanted. So it seemed, right? So there was no argument within me. So it was that, classic 90 days or something, beginner's pink cloud, which is a true spiritual experience. I just had no context. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know what I needed to do to maintain it. And in the city where I got sober, there were as many meetings as there were bars, but there were no meetings where people could explain to me what was the diseases of alcoholism and what was the solution. And for the first 2 years, I've done all of the things that I was told to do, including emptying ashtrays. People still smoke that way, smoked at the time, and making coffee and even baking banana bread and cleaning the rooms. And when I was a year sober, somebody told me that, oh, now you can sponsor people. And I really didn't know what that would be. So I did what my sponsor did with me. We just discussed each other's dramas in offering some solutions. And we were very heavily invested in what I know today is the first two columns of the resentment inventory. I knew who I was disappointed with, which was pretty much at that point every person that I met, and I knew why. And I stayed in the story of that, so heavily, and that would help my sponsees, maybe one or two sponsees. It's not that I really had too many sponsees to manage their dramas, so we were managing each other's dramas, and there was a sense that that's just not enough, right? Somehow that's just really not getting us anywhere. We're like, now you were resenting that person, now we're together resenting that person at that circumstance. But there really was no, and it probably is not accurate to say that there was no hint that there was something bigger available in Alcoholics Anonymous. There was this guy by name Terry who was coming from one meeting to another holding a big book under his arm, and I was told to stay away from him. And when Terry would share, he would say something that I couldn't understand it at the level of words. Like I would never be able to repeat it. What is that? What is it you said? But somehow, whatever it is that he was saying would touch me very deeply. But I wanted to be with the bigger crowd, so I stayed away from Terry. I never came up to Terry and never asked Terry, show me that book or tell me what you're talking about. And 2 years of this kind of abstinence, right? This type of recovery, I gracefully hit another bottom. In Alcoholics Anonymous, without alcohol, having what seemed to me all of the tools that other people used at my disposal, plus like a crew of people who were servicing like my other needs, like psychologist and psychiatrist and the medication, which in my case I was using, as I can see today, to treat the spiritual malady. None of this worked. And I remember at some point I went to this Zen Buddhist monastery, and I got so just attracted to the ritual of meditation and the calm and the Zen style and all of those things. I came back with a cushion and with incense sticks, and I had even a little room, my meditation room in my apartment at the time, and I would sit down and I just would crawl out of my skin. I just couldn't be silent for a second. There's nothing in me that I couldn't recognize silence within. Like there was nothing that was catching anything but noise, and the noise was obsessive, and the noise was very destructive. There was a lot of hate and unacceptance. There was a lot of fear that I wouldn't probably admit that it was fear, and it was just this holy mess of unmanageability. So I'm back to where I was before I picked up the drink, and there is absolutely nothing I can do to distract myself from it. And then there was another shift when I was thrown on my knees and I was forced to pray again without knowing what would be the solution. The most graceful moments came in my recovery, in those moments when I was so broken that I didn't know what to ask for. Like I didn't have a hint to God as to how the solution, in what form the solution can come. And in my case, the solution came as a flyer to the study uh, um, for the work group of 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was conducted in the nearby town. And I went there with a number of other people, and I was very much skeptical because, during those 2 years of dryness, not only did I start experiencing my suffering, but also the tools of denying that I'm experiencing suffering. They were getting more sophisticated. So I was full of cynicism and mistrust, and I didn't really believe that there could be a solution. And I came, and it wasn't catching again, right? People were speaking honestly, and people were speaking about the experience. And during the last session, the guy who turned out to be the founder of the group that I later joined, he was sharing about his 9-step experience, and he was sharing about something that was caused by another person, some harm that was caused to him, and he was talking about it with such complete freedom that I just paused, and there is something in me that wanted to experience that freedom. And after the study was over, and I was judging the entire time of the study, I found the group that brought the study, and I joined the group, and it was the Interaction Big Book group that at the time was meeting in Berkeley Heights, New Jersey. And I started going there. The first group I came, I was just amazed at, here it is, a brightly lit room with about 60 people, people sitting in different corners reading the book to each other. And then people sharing their experience with working the 12 steps from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was something about the energy. There was something that was being transmitted in that room that I never really sensed at other meetings that I went to. So I started going to that meeting, and I asked somebody to sponsor me, and she gave me like 2.5 hours of her time before the meeting to read the Big Book, and she read it to me like with great enthusiasm. And it turned out that she had a year less sober. She was a year less sober than I was at the time, and she was like 10 years younger. And when I discovered that sort of didn't match my model for perfect sponsorship, as she was reading the Big Book, I like literally started thinking of how can I get out of this imperfect sponsorship, because she can be 10 years younger and less than 2 years sober. And at that moment when that thought came, I was watching her mouth, moving as she was reading the Big Book, and I realized that, well, this is a transformed person. This is what I want. She was reading it with such an enthusiasm, such love. She wanted to convey what she had, and I wanted that. I wanted that quality. That's what I saw in her, and it was really beautiful. And I stayed, and I stumbled through the steps, and I stumbled over every single one of the character defects just in taking the steps. And when I started making my first amends, the group was going through the regular format was that we were reading 164 pages out of the Big Book, and then we would do the work group, first based on probably something like back to basics, and then the group was expanding the script, and then more and more people were presenting. And here it is. I've made my first imperfect amends by admitting to my ex-husband that I slept with his best friend because I forgot to consult my sponsor to make the amends. And here it is. The group is just pushing me into service, and they say, well, you will present, and then you will listen to that girl's 5th step, and this lady wants sponsorship, and on. And you see, like in my world, being helpful, I didn't even want to look helpful, right? Like in my idea of what was cool, like helpful was not on the list of things. And this is where I really started having an experience, when I was pushed into service, and when I started seeing through, just meeting with another person, how God was doing for me something that I couldn't do for myself. And it was and it, I mean, surprisingly, it stayed that way. I haven't done anything in my life consistently. I mean, the notion of discipline is still foreign to me, and it still is a great, obstacle in achieving certain things. But with service, it just always stayed that way. Like I've always worked with a lot of people, and and because there's something that happened to me, and there are certain tools that I acquired during even the first imperfect run through the steps that really brought about some transformation in the way I felt, in the way I responded to things. You see, I was able to, not just be firmly established in the first two columns of the resentment inventory, but I was actually taken into the a vision of what a hell that interpretation created in me, which is the third column. And I experienced it fully, and I could see how it was my thinking and my interpretation of what people did and how life acted. That what created that suffering that I was carrying with me. And through really experiencing that suffering, I was brought to the idea that I can be free from that. And that's the forgiveness process that built into the resentment inventory. And I really came to a point where I became willing to be freed from my resentments. My resentments gave me power. I mean, I lived that's what energized me through most of my life. But when I was doing my inventory the way it's described in the big book, I could see how much suffering it created in me, and how much a resentment separated me from the rest of the world, not just from isolated people. In my case, every person I interacted with, I had beef with. I couldn't even explain why. Like in some people, it's just the very fact of their existence would make me bristle with antagonism, right? There was this mechanism of fight, of just rejecting everything that life was offering. It was so strong in me. I could see through just the resentment inventory, how much suffering I was experiencing, and how much isolation, and how much self-talk, and how much dryness, and how much anger, and just this resistance, and what a suffering it was to live with that. And so when it was offered to me, and that's what our process offers between column 3 and 4, to become willing to be freed from those resentments, I was. And that also was a grace, but that was already the grace of the transformational grace of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because, I came in, fighting, screaming and fighting, but there was something there is something that brought me into this process that was apparently enough to continue going. And the process itself is empowering. And at some point, for an alcoholic, a resentment alcoholic, to just even have an idea of forgiveness, of letting go of resentment, it's an incredible grace. We take it for granted today, but it's a complete 180 from a normal setup of an alcoholic. And that's what this process delivered for me, just the willingness. But, the willingness can really the willingness really spurs and really pushes. It just opens some channels that are capable of really transforming that. And yes, in the fourth column, it was so easy to see that, my whole movement in life was all about me, based on fear that I don't get what I want or will lose what I have. And it was easy for me to look just how many fears I have. After we completed the resentment inventory, I was afraid of everything. I was afraid to die, what it seemed, but then I was afraid to live. And I was engaging with life, with fear. Like I was afraid of every manifestation of life, because I didn't trust that it will deliver, it will give me what I want. And just to see that I was completely paralyzed, completely stopped by fear in every aspect of my life, it was in and of itself, the freeing experience. And that's what I see today. The way the steps work, it's not that I see something and then I start trying to get rid of it. because there is no such thing as getting rid of it. But it's just the very seeing, the very honest seeing, the watch, what's the notion of watching that's described in the 10th step, just bringing the awareness to where it seems to be disharmony, it starts doing its work. And then I, wrote out the harms that I've done to other people. I analyzed my sexual relationships that were very lopsided, and here I was, like, I wasn't, I didn't have any spectacular experience after my first run through the steps, but I've had enough of an experience for the transformation happened to the extent that I wanted to carry it on. Like, I wanted to help other people. I wanted to do this unnatural act of, giving my precious time that's usually reserved just for myself and for my pleasure to another being who's suffering. And so I went, and it was really a beautiful life, and has been a beautiful life with a lot of twists and challenges, and I guess I don't remember when I was something years sober, and we were bringing a big book study to the Milestone House with my boyfriend at the time, or something, some kind of event we were bringing to the Milestone House. And I remember how a gorgeous European young long hair, girl came up to me and asked for help. And I remember the moment, like at that moment, I just knew that I will know this person, like this person will be part of my life for a long time. And I've had these relationships with women, and I didn't know that I could have these relationships with women. All of my relationships with women were based in competition and jealousy. And, as far as I'm concerned, women are just an obstacle to, my my way of gaining leverage in this world through the other half of the population, right? So, like, everyone is in competition. There is no trust. There is no love. There is no, soul connection. There is no notion of a soul connection, right? There was no vision that a relationship with another female can have any value, right? And then just the heart opens up, and and all of a sudden, boom, like, I'm teary. There are tears in my eyes, and I experience this profound sense of love for another, just connecting to another human being, just the love of another human being. And when I was about, I don't know, maybe 15 years. Oh, so I was. It's funny how I just kind of skimmed through this part of my experience in sobriety when I was through the steps the first time. And some thirst opened up in me to know there's something that is working in my life, to know it better. And I didn't know how to call it. I still don't feel comfortable with the word God, though I will use it because I know that, it's a good reference, it's a good pointer. But I could see that there was something that was working in my life that knew the direction, that knew the purpose, that knew that I could trust to have the power. And I didn't know what it was, and I wanted to know that better. And I got into this stage of seeking, like intense seeking, that basically, in the past I thought that, I'll get sober, I'll go to Paris, or I'll go, I'll do something for me. And all of a sudden, like, I'm going to these retreats, like 7 days silent retreat, 10 days silent retreat, 3 times a year, 5 times a year. I just, like, something just caught fire. And it's not a kind of trip that you can do, like, with your girlfriends, like, not everyone wants to do that. But for some reason, I just had this thirst, and then I started sponsoring girls, and then I, like, drive them to the Vipassana retreat. But those gullible, and it's like, and that's a really beautiful stage when I'm still very much think that I'm chasing God, right? I think that I still need to add something to feel it more. But then it turns out that I've been caught by God, and there is no volition to what's happening. It's just there is this celebration of this power and clearing out of different things, and I continue sponsoring a lot of women, and sponsoring is I'm sure that everyone in this room has an experience of sponsoring another human being, but for me that's the most transformative thing. That's where I really started feeling that God's working through me, and there is no doubt, and it's not about me, and we can be in. That's when I started feeling the fellowship, the we part of our fellowship. And then when I was about 10 years, maybe, maybe 13 years sober. So you see, I left the Soviet Union when I was 25, and I just I left it, I left all of the things, right? So I just crossed it out, just with a big black marker, done. Never thought I would come back. Never thought I would didn't want to speak the language. And I was skiing somewhere, and it was a point in my recovery when I separated from my home group because I moved. I didn't attach myself to another home group, so I was kind of homeless. And in a way, I would show up at meetings where I was asked to speak mostly. So my recovery got a little dry, and I was skiing somewhere in Colorado. And I got sick like a dog, in the mountains. So I can't sleep. I'm completely sick. So I don't understand, what's happening. And then I got a call from the director of the milestone. She was contacted by church, and they were looking help for two people who seemed to speak with the same accent that I was speaking. And she took an extra moment to talk to them a little bit more and find out what it was. And there were two people in New Jersey who didn't speak, only spoke Russian, and they were fresh out of treatment, and they needed help. And here I was. And I came back, and I went to church. I started sponsoring these two people in Russian, and then a little later we opened an A group. And then we opened another A group, and then we started organizing some events. It turned out that there were a lot of Russian-speaking people in the United States, and now we are building service structure. So we have enough groups that empowered us, that created a service structure that organizes several events a year. We meet in Akron every year after. We used to meet after the main event of the Founders Day. Now we meet during that. And this year we actually talked to the organizers of the Founders Day, and they will give us a room for Russian-speaking fellowship next year. And then in November we meet in Wilson House, and it's a cozier place. It's more of a retreat place for us. And we have an online group that meets every day that we started in COVID. And there is an international communications that also take place with the Russian-speaking community. And then here I am, doing service in the language I never thought I would ever do. And that just turned out to be extremely enriching. Because I got to meet the parts of me that were discarded, that were not seen, that were still hurting. Those roots, that I wasn't able to, that I never really dealt with, So, and then about also years ago, when my boyfriend and I, we were doing a bunch of work groups, step work groups in the United States. And I remember he would always push me to do the same thing in Russia, do the same thing in Russia. People in Russia also need it. And he would even like put a microphone in front of me and say, well, just let's do this, we'll record it and then we'll distribute it. And I could never do that because I just cannot talk into, an empty space. And then when we started this Russian speaking group, and there were like 6 or 7 people, all newcomers, and I did this conducted work group for them, and we recorded them for those people who couldn't attend. And it became this big book study in Russian language with the handouts, and I translated everything that I could translate. I corrected the translation of the big books. I really put a lot of effort into that. And 5-7 years later, there are hundreds of people in Russia who went through this process. They went through the steps just through those seminars. And I never thought that it would have the life, those recordings would have the life that they had. And so the service and the growth is continuing now in really across the world, because in the last couple of years, 2 years, since February of 2022, a lot of people left the country. A lot of Ukrainians left Ukraine. A lot of Russians left Russia. A lot of the whole world has actually just shifted. Everything shifted. A lot of people came here, and so we have a lot of newcomers. We have people who don't speak English, who need help, and our Russian-speaking fellowship is growing, and it's a really beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to have to have 300 people come together for a Founders Day, and we will rent buses, and we'll do history tours, and we'll do, run through the steps, and we'll tell them about the traditions. Yeah, which recently we started introducing the traditions, the driest, the least popular topic that we need to get very well versed in if we want to build the structure, if we want to observe the traditions, if we want to be an example of unity. And that's very beautiful. 7 years ago, I met a man, a Russian man. I never thought I would have a relationship with a Russian man. So because I discarded all of the things Russian, I met him at the International Convention in 2015. I was speaking at the Russian AA group, and he was there. And the moment I saw this guy, I knew that I wanted to marry him. And then 2 years later, and then a few months later, we got married on Waimanalo Beach here on Oahu in Hawaii, and the famous director of the Milestone House married us. And then 2 years later, we moved to Hawaii to live. And apparently, I moved here to do the service of Alcoholics Anonymous and to dance hula. I was honored with a Hawaiian name a few weeks ago, which is a big, big deal. And so the life somehow became very effortless and it became very good. Like the life is good, and there is a knowing that life's good. And trust me, if you're feeling miserable in Hawaii, like there is no question that you're an asshole. It's just like you have to be the problem if you're experiencing misery in Hawaii. So it's I guess everything has been taken care of. Like everything has been taken care of for you. So so I have a few minutes left, and I maybe I'll just close with this, that I truly when I learned that I was an alcoholic, it was a curse. It was a diagnosis. It was this impediment, it seemed, that I would have to live with. I was diseased. I felt that it was a disease. And, years later, the biggest grace alcoholism is the biggest grace because it had the power, it has the wisdom, to really like eradicate, to erase my personal will. That was the only thing I relied on, that I trusted, that really has brought me into intense suffering and nothing else. And just to know that there is something and grow in the feeling, in the experience of that something that knows and that can be trusted, and that's just the goodness. It's an incredible gift, and to be able to transmit it to other people, like we have been from the beginnings of our fellowship, is an incredible privilege. And I'm very happy to be here today and to share my experience with all of you. And I think I'll end with that so that you guys have a couple of minutes to close the meeting.